All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Um, okay, I think it's echoing a bit, but that's okay. So we can go ahead and now get started finally. Sorry for the whole entire wait, but inshallah, it'll work smoothly from here on out. So as you guys know, this is the first tafsir part with Surah Al-Fil as a part of a 10 surah series. So now that you guys are on now, inshallah, we can see you in the next tafsir series. But we can go ahead and get started with this one. And I know it's a webinar, so y'all can applaud, but secretly applaud in your room or wherever you are right now. And give it up for Brother Saad Qadri.
Can I begin, please?
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, cool. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa. Salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. Amma ba'd, fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So I want to thank all of you, Jazakumullah khairan, for inviting me to take part in the, I guess, bi-weekly Tafseer program that will be happening through Mina in your personal development courses. As someone who spent much of his youth in Mina, I can definitely attest to the fact that this is something that I found to be a beneficial idea. Growing up in Mina, we were very actively involved, meaning that we were activists, and I think every definition of the word. However, sometimes when you become overly active, you forget about yourself. And that's true in everything. I was speaking to my neighbor today, and we were just talking, Matt and I, and he was just saying how they're going to go on vacation, he and his wife. And I was just smiling, saying, you know, my wife and I haven't gone on vacation since I can't even remember. And I'm like, with 4 kids, you can't leave them behind and go somewhere. And he has 2 kids, and he said that, well, sometimes you just have to do it. You just have to make time for yourself. There's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. Thus, when you get involved in different things and you become active in those areas, then what ends up happening is that you forget about yourself. And in this area of being, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to forget about yourself, because if you forget about yourself, you're in essence forgetting about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because your connection to Allah is you, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala established a relationship between He and you, not He and Mina. Mina is just a organization that's comprised of different individuals. If those individuals are strong in their submission to Allah and their connection to Allah and their desire to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it'll be an organization that remains strong. And if it's filled with people who may have impure intentions, etc., then it won't be able to be as beneficial as people had hoped. And so when we sit here for these programs, especially the personal development program, we have to try to take advantage of it, not as a halqa, or not as merely a tafsir class. This is an opportunity to begin to develop ourselves such that on the Day of Judgment, we can utilize this meeting to be a means by which we had gained Allah's pleasure and we're able to attain the reward of the hereafter. This set of tafsir that will occur for the last 10 surah of Juz Amman of the Quran are going to go through a set of chapters that most of us are very familiar with. Most of us have memorized these portions. Not all of us, but most of us have. And unfortunately, when we recite them in prayer, sometimes there's a void because we're reciting the Arabic, but we're not really understanding what's going on behind it. And so by sitting down and reviewing what these surah have to offer, it helps us enrich our prayer, it helps us enrich our personal lives, it helps us enrich our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because now we know what He's talking about. And this is for both the Arab and the Ajam. It's not only for people who don't speak the Arabic language. The Arabic language, Rasulullah ﷺ had mentioned, he points to the fact that whoever speaks Arabic is considered Arab. Thus, we look at this as not a cultural affair, we look at this as a religious, a spiritual endeavor. And so when we sit down to go into the chapter of the elephant, Surah Al-Fil, we're going to see actually some connections made to previous surah that some of us may have memorized as well that will help us recognize that the Quran يفسر بعضها على بعض. Some of it does tafsir over the other. So now beginning, so the homepage looks much cooler on my computer, but I guess it's not shared that way. But regardless, for Surah Al-Fil, we're going to go into four things today. We're going to go into an introduction of tafsir and just general idea of gaining knowledge. And then we're going to go into a background of Surah Fil, the story of Surah Fil, and practical and spiritual benefits taken from Surah Fil. Now, tafsir is a very, very interesting and a very comprehensive subject. The reason why it's interesting is because it is sort of the combination of prophetic guidance, Quranic evidence and guidance regarding other verses of Quran, prophetic guidance regarding verses of Quran, and human understanding of Quran as well. All of those come together. Now, one of the issues today, and I'm someone who was very fortunate to have completed my bachelor's and my master's in this country. So I'm very much accustomed to Western education, and I was an educator for about 10 years here before I changed professions. And I was also someone who was very fortunate to go overseas and study, and I studied in Zambia. And there I was able to see a different type of teaching. And one of the benefits I found from having both of these backgrounds is the idea that some of the elements of Western education are very problematic. And I can tell you this because my master's is in education. I was a former high school educator. I was a AP English teacher. And one of the faults that comes within Western education is the fact that we often give students the ability to come to conclusions and draw conclusions in areas that they are not yet equipped to do so. Now, people don't like the statement. They say, well, how can you put a barrier between me and Quran? I'm not putting any barrier between anyone and Quran. What I'm saying is the Quran is for everyone. Everyone should recite it. Everyone should love it. Everyone should understand it. Everyone should act upon it. But there are certain areas of Quran that there are prerequisites to understand the Quran in order to be able to take advantage of the Quran. Now, I'm not using my laptop because for some reason the connection wasn't working well there, so I'm not going to be able to show you this. I was going to take one example and just highlight how problematic this could sometimes be if we don't understand Quran. Within the mazahib of the deen, within the different schools of thought of deen, the classical schools of thought within our deen, there's a madhab called the Shafi'i madhab. The Shafi'i madhab, established by the followers of the usul, the principles of Imam al-Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayh, in his understanding of Quran and Sunnah, from obviously from the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they come up with a very interesting principle. They say, from the verse, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, all you who believe, إِذَا قُمْتُم مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ, when you stand for prayer, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, wash your face. وَأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, and wash your hands to your elbows. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, wipe your head. وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, and your feet, meaning wash your feet until the ankles. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُبًا فَطَهَّرُوا, and if you are in a state of major ritual impurity, then perform a complete purification, which is ghusl. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ مَرْضَى, and if you're sick, أو على سفر, or if you're traveling, أو جاء أحد من الغائط, or if you go to relieve yourself, أو لامستم النساء. Now, the way the recitations, because one of the ways by which a person does tafsir is to understand the different accepted recitations of our deen. There are multiple recitations of Quran, 7 known recitations that are very common. So that's why you hear some people say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, and others will say Maliki Yawmiddin. Someone will say Qad aflaha al-mu'minun, others will say Qad aflaha al-mu'minun. Some will say I don't know, وَالضُّحَيْ وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَيْ. You'll hear some say رَأَيْتُمُ, others say رَأَيْتُم. These differences are sometimes a fa and a waw will be switched around. They're all accepted recitations. So in a recitation, we see when Quran is being recited, the verse, oh la, the word, the phrase, oh lamastumun nisa, that this word lamasa is from bab tafa'ul. Fa'ala yufa'ilu mufa'ala. The bab mufa'ala, I should say, excuse me. And so, yeah, bab tafa'ul. This means that two people engage in something. So lamasa means to touch, and lamasa, two individuals engaging and touching, i.e. refers to intimate relationships between the husband and the wife. So, Ola Masumun Nisa, for those who follow the recitation La Masa, that means that if you are intimately engaged with one another, i.e., you have marital relationships, then you need to purify yourself. The Shawafi, they take another recitation. They say, Oh, Lamastumun Nisa. It's an acceptable recitation. Lamasa means to touch. And this is why in the Shafi'i madhab, to touch someone of the opposite gender, not a direct relative, i.e., a child, a sibling, a parent, a direct grandparent, a direct grandchild, or a direct niece or nephew, or direct aunt or uncle. If you touch the opposite gender other than these individuals, then your wudu will be made invalid. Now, if someone's going to come to a conclusion like this, they're not going to be able to do so unless they understand the Arabic language, they understand different recitations, etc., etc., etc. So I know, I mean, I grew up as an English teacher over the past decade or so, and I know so many times we come to conclusions, and I even hear my students in my AP classes, they would say, come on, brother Saad, you're making that up. And I'm like, no, no, really, I'm not. Like, come on, you're making that up. I'm like, no, if you go to so-and-so's initial primary sources, their journals, etc., this is what he makes reference to. And sometimes it's really just my own statements and my thoughts. When it comes to Quran, we're allowed to have our own statements and thoughts, but they have to be kept within the boundaries of what general scholarship has assumed to be acceptable. If not, a person go down a very dangerous path. Now, gaining knowledge, this is a course of gaining knowledge. We don't take these courses lightly. I have performed wudu. I'm wearing the garments I wear when I teach. I've tied my turban. And I'm sitting in front of you as I would sit when I teach my students in my actual in-person classes. So if my camera were on right now, you would see that I'm actually completely dressed as I would teach with my normal classes. This is how all of us should come when we gain knowledge, even if we're online. Because yes, we're online, we cannot see one another. But the reality is that we're sitting for a few moments as students of knowledge, and we want to be accepted under that gathering, those individuals who are striving to seek knowledge for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Now, if we go in front of our teachers, classically speaking, we would be very careful on how we present ourselves. So I expect everyone when they come here that they are in a state of wudu. Now, a female might say, well, maybe I'm not praying. Well, even then you can do wudu. You be in a state of wudu, you should try to face the qibla. Now, if you're on a desktop, it's a little harder. If you're on a laptop or on the phone, you face the qibla. You sit in an acceptable sitting position, not just lying down and, messaging and, have like two other screens open on your computer. No, that's not how we do it. Because when we gain knowledge, we're interacting with Allah's words. So we show respect. And through respect and adab, then Allah Ta'ala opens up the floodgates of understanding. And Anwar Shah Kashmir, a great scholar of the subcontinent, he was once asked, how did you attain this type of knowledge and this memory? And he said, I don't know, but I think it was my respect for knowledge. Even when I would stack my books, I would keep Quran on top, then Hadith underneath. Then under that, he would keep fiqh. And under that, he would keep adab and the different texts. And he would base it on its relevance to divine knowledge. And he felt that that was a means by which he was given knowledge to the capacity that he was given. We see in Nuji rahmatullahi alayhi in Ta'alim Muta'allim, he has an entire chapter and that he speaks about in this chapter two students who were very close in acumen and understanding and intelligence, but one outdid the other. And they were actually classmates and they were partners in class. So they would review together. And when asked why, the only conclusion they could reach was when they sat together, one faced the Qibla and the other didn't face the Qibla. So these are things that we should maximize on when gaining knowledge. We should come in and we should pretty much separate ourselves from the world and say that, look, I'm going to be on a path that goes towards paradise, according to Hadith, which the angels' wings become my carpets that I'm standing or sitting on. And so in this period of time, all distractions are completely cut off. And all worldly thoughts and inhibitions are now severed for the sake of this knowledge. And this is why we travel overseas. When I was living in Zambia, we didn't have the opportunity to be distracted by many of the worldly things. Why? Because we're in Zambia. What are you going to be distracted for in Zambia? There's not that much there. In comparison to America, it's much more difficult. So now that you're sitting for these half-hour courses every week, I know this week's going to be a little longer. We started late and have to give an introduction. But you want to take advantage of gaining knowledge in a way that you would do so in the presence of a scholar, of a teacher in your masjid. Maybe that teacher, he or she sitting in front of you, how would you be in front of that individual? Any questions thus far before I move on? No? Okay, awesome. Now we go to the background of Surah Fil. The background of Surah Fil actually ties in two surah together, Surah Buruj and Surah Fil. Surah Fil is what we're covering today, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, Alam tara kayfa fa'a rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Have you not seen the way that you dealt with the people of the elephants? Surah Buruj is about half a juz earlier, or a little more than a quarter of a juz earlier, I should say, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. It begins وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ وَالشَّاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. The people of the trenches were destroyed, they were killed. النَّارِ ذَاتِ الْوُقُودِ إِذْ هُمْ عَلَيْهَا. These fires, these trenches of fire were lit for them, and they were made to sit therein. Now, what happens in this particular case? The people of the trench in Surah Buruj is from a Sahih hadith. In Sahih Muslim, that Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhuma narrates. And he speaks about his name was Yusuf dhun Nawas. Now, Yusuf dhun Nawas, he was a king who was an idolater, and he was aided and helped by a sorcerer or a magician who allowed his rule and kingdom to remain strong despite the fact that there were people of belief in his community. And what he was really well known for was the story of the boy and the king. How many, I'm assuming, I don't know if I can even ask, but how many of you have heard of the boy and the king, that story? I don't even know if you can just say in your chat box or no. Okay, so yes, okay, so some of you have heard it. Okay. And some of you haven't, and then perhaps it's a good topic to cover one of these days in the future. But the boy and the king, this is that story. Yusuf dhun Nawas, he was the king in that story. And he was from a group of rulers called the Himyar, and they were they had a control over Yemen. And in Yemen, you had righteous monotheists who were Christians. And this happened before the Prophet came. This is about 70 years before the Bi'tha. Now, similar incidents happened throughout history on 3 occasions, in Yemen, Syria, and Iran. This is the one referred to in Yemen. And about 70 years before the Prophet during the Fatra. The Fatra is after the time of Isa alayhi until the time of the Prophet when there's no messages, no messengers who were sent. This time in which some disbelief may have seeped in, this period of time is when this incident occurred. Now, because of this incident, you had a group of people who took for that incident. And this is where we get the story of the elephant, or as it says here, elephant, which is Sadanese for elephant. I don't know how I forgot the T, so I apologize for that right there. So the story of the elephant actually rests on the shoulders of people of the trench. Why? Because the people of the trench, they were the individuals who were persecuted and who were killed, and 2 individuals escaped to go seek help. And those individuals who went to go seek help, this is where the story of the elephant comes from. Some of the ulama say the story of the elephant came about 30 years before the Prophet was born. The majority, it's a different opinion, who say it was the same year the Prophet was born. So now we go into the story of the elephant. Allah Ta'ala mentions, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the people of the elephant? And this beginning is a grammatical construct. It is a rhetorical strategy where Allah Ta'ala poses a question. And we know that there are types of questions that are posed within the English language in order to make a person become more aware of the moment. And so now, obviously, Rasulullah didn't see this because this happened a few months before he was born. Some ulama say between 3 and 6 months before he was born. So he could not have seen this. But one of the reasons why Allah Ta'ala is mentioning this is that it was such a commonly discussed incident that people had spoken about it such that it was preserved with an oral tradition, and it became a part of Arab folklore and Arab reality, for that matter. And Habib Qadri, your Mina advisor, is calling me right now. Do I stop the program and take this call? Did you guys have him call me, or no? Do I just continue? I'm assuming I should continue. I don't know. I don't know if this was like set up by you guys. Maybe he's listening in. I said something wrong. No? Okay. So Allah Ta'ala, he uses this rhetorical device. And he asked that, have you not seen this? And this is to draw our attention to the fact this is a mutawatir. This is a tawatir khabar. So many people had narrated this and seen this that it became preserved as a true story. And it was a true story in our history. Just to give you an example of what mutawatir or tawatur narration is, if you're not familiar with that statement. So I see a few names here. I see Nu'man, Hamad, Maryam, Zeba. So I'll use these 4 names. So let's say after this talk, I'm going to go visit my parents. And as I'm leaving, Nu'man, he says, hey, what are you doing afterwards? Let's go out for a bite to eat. And I say, look, we don't live in the same state. That's impossible. So, but I'm going to go visit my parents. He's like, oh, what route are you going to take? And I said, I'm going to take 94 towards Chicago from Milwaukee. He's like, okay, well, just avoid the Lake Cook entrance. Why? Because that has a horrible accident there. I'm like, okay, I have no idea how you know this, but sure. Now, as I'm driving, I get a call from Hamad. And Hamad says, hey, bro, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, why? He's like, oh, I heard there's a really bad accident in 94. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's interesting that you say that. Then Sister Maryam, she texts, and she's like, Brother Saad, I'm just worried. I heard about terrible accidents on 94. And I'm like, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. And she's like, you know what, you should avoid 94, take 294 South instead. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. Then Sister Zeba calls, and she says, hey, you should really avoid 94, take 294 South instead. There's a really bad accident. It's carnage everywhere. Now, is it possible that they made this up? Absolutely. They might have been completely set this up in advance, and they might have even spoken to Habib. Maybe that's why Habib was calling me right now to also tell me that. So just one big Freemasonic plan that they had. But if as I'm driving, I stop at the gas station and go get gasoline, and I go inside to purchase, I don't know, something to drink, and the person says, well, son, where are you going? And I'm like, well, I'm on my way to visit my parents. Like, oh, that's awfully nice of you. What's your route? I'm like, I'm taking 94. He's like, oh, no, take 294 because 94 is a bad accident. Now, chances are you probably didn't know which gas station I was going to. And as I'm going on the road and I stop at a toll and I forgot my iPass, so I paid the toll. And then the person says, oh, I see you driving through here sometimes. Where are you going? I'm going to my parents' place. Oh, really? Where they live? Such and such place. Oh, avoid 94, take 294 instead. And then now I'm driving and I'm speeding because all these random individuals are telling me not to take 94. I'm taking a different route. I'm going fast. I get pulled over by a cop. And after giving me the ticket and before wishing me a good day with that cynical smile, he tells me what? You know what? Avoid 94. Is a really bad accident there. Chances are none of you guys are so pious. I mean, I believe in your piety, but not so pious that you saw visions in your dream last night of which gas station I would attend and which toll booth I would cross through and which policeman would pull me over. The fact that all of these individuals can make a statement without necessarily meeting or having the chance to speak to one another, that is known as mutawatir. That's a tawatir narration, that you cannot have forged or made up that narration. So Surah Fil, when Allah Ta'ala says, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil, He is saying that this is so well known, and so many people witnessed this, and so many individuals have preserved the story, there's no possible way this could be made up. So, O Messenger of Allah, though you weren't born when this occurred, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, know that it's as if you saw it based upon the narrations of individuals who have kept the story alive till today, and this was a miracle attributed to you, that Allah preserved the year of your birth through this incident, and He preserved your people through this incident, and He preserved the center of your worship, the Kaaba, through this incident. Now, the story of the elephants, we have Dhun Nuwas. When he was throwing An-Nari Dhat al-Wuqud, when he was throwing these people into this ditch, two people they survived. And they took whatever remnants of their scripture they had and they secretly snuck out. They hid in the trenches and they snuck out at night. And they fled from Yemen to Syria. When they arrived to Syria, they met the Qaisar, the Caesar. And they said, "You are a Christian leader, and we are Christian worshippers. And we have been oppressed by this king Dhun Nawas, and he threw us, and we saw our families being burnt inside of a trench. How will you help us?" So he becomes very upset. So he writes a letter to Najashi. Now, Najashi, the Negus, remember, these are terms, they're not names of rulers. So Qaisar, Caesar, he's not one ruler. Negus, Najashi, he's not one ruler. These were the titles that were inherited by anyone who was the kings of certain regions. The Christian king of Sham, of the Levant, that was Caesar. The Christian king of Ethiopia, Abyssinia, that was Negus. So Najashi turns to two of his strongest governors, Arbat and Abraha, and he tells them that, look, you need to go and fix this situation. So those two individuals, what they do, they amass an army, and they are governors, but they're also military men, and they attack Yemen. And they overthrow the Yemeni rule, the not the Yemeni rule, but the rule of those individuals who were within Yemen at this time from the Himyar. And they overthrow the Himyar. And then what happens is that they now free the Christians there. Dhun Nuwas tried to escape. And when he tried to escape, he, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, he escaped, but he fled into the sea and he drowned therein. Now, Arbat and Abraha, there were two individuals who are now going to be in a position of power. So they begin to fight amongst themselves. And Abraha, he proves to be victorious over Arbat. And what he does is now he constructs his own cathedral, his own kanisa, his own church. And he saw many of the Yemeni Arabs to be deeply in love with the Kaaba, and he wanted to have that same veneration and awe shown for their house of worship. Because in the end, the Kaaba is the house of worship established in that time frame from Ibrahim alayhi salam. So they wanted to see the cathedral that he builds. And this cathedral, there's much description to it. It was so tall that if you stood at the bottom, you could not see the top clearly. And it was built with gold and silver and lined with precious gems. And it was something that was never seen before. Its like was never seen before. It's a masterpiece. And the hope was, and he told the Najashi this, that I'm going to build this for us, and people will now come to our cathedral, and this will become a center of worship. And as a result of center of worship, will also become a center of trade and business. But the Arabs didn't care, because they were deeply devoted to the Kaaba. So they continued to visit the Kaaba. From the Arab tribes, Quraysh and Qahtan and Adnan, you see what happens. They become very upset. So one person from Banu Kinana, what he does, in the secrecy of night, he goes and pretends to be a worshiper. And he comes in dressed as a worshiper, and he walks into the cathedral, and no one's really paying attention to him. And he goes and he crouches down and he defecates. Once he defecates in the cathedral, he's not done there. He takes the feces and begins to smear it over the cathedral, and he leaves. He wants to show Abraha, this is what we think of your quote-unquote center of worship. And he leaves. There's also one narration that mentions that when he smeared the feces, whatever, there's another narration that mentions that some of the nomadic tribes nearby were just using a fire for cooking in their own needs to keep warm, and the wind blew it towards the cathedral, and the cathedral was damaged severely. So this infuriated Abraha. So he contacted the Negus, and he said, look, we're going to take revenge. And Abraha said, yeah. The Negus said yes. So he sent an army with Abraha towards the Kaaba. The army had 8 elephants that accompanied the main elephant, whose name was Mahmud. Mahmud was a very large elephant, and it was very strong. And the Arabs, they didn't see elephants, so they didn't know how to fight elephants. If you study the life of Umar radiallahu anhu, when he fought the Persians, they used elephants as a tactic in war against the Arabs, and the Arabs didn't know what to do because they weren't trained to handle elephants. So they were going to come into the Kaaba, tie these elephants to the different pillars, and pull the chains and cause the pillars to collapse, and the Kaaba would completely crumble under. Some of the ulama also say that they were going to push it down with the strength of the elephants, the walls. So when the Arabs heard about this, Dhun Nafar, he called the Arabs together and said, "We must defend our Kaaba." Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He didn't want human beings to defend the Kaaba. And we're going to get into that later. So the Abraha, when he marched towards the Kaaba, towards Mecca, a large group of Arabs came, and this was from a Yemeni tribe initially, because they were trying to cut him off initially, and they defeated Dhun Nafar. Then Nufail bin Habib, he also came forth, and this is from Banu Khatha'am, and they come and they try to defend the Kaaba, and they're also defeated. And Nufail bin Habib, he's taken as a prisoner. They were initially going to kill him, but they decided not to, and that's going to actually bite them later. And so they're defeated and they're captured, and he's captured, and now they continue. Now when they go towards Ta'if, they go to Bani Thaqif. Bani Thaqif, they say, look, we completely agree with you. You just don't touch our land. They see that, oh, you know what? These are good people. We're not going to destroy their land. Now, Lat and Uzza were two different idols that competed with one another. And Lat, he was within Banu Thaqif and Ta'if. And Uzza, she was within Makkah al-Mukarramah. These are idols. And so Ta'if wanted to see Makkah ruined. So everyone would come and now do tawaf and worship their idol, Lat. So not only do they say, you know what, we're not going to fight you, and we're going to welcome you. Abu Rigal, one of their men, he said, I'm going to actually show you how to get there. And he brought them into Makkah al-Mukarramah. When they came closer to Makkah al-Mukarramah, they arrived in a place called Al-Maghmas. That's where they settled, and they saw a group of camels. And when they saw these camels that were grazing, they captured 200 of them. And these were the camels of Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ. Then Abraha, he sent a messenger, Hanata al-Himyari, to Abdul Muttalib. And Abdul Muttalib, he basically said, look, I'm not here to fight you. That's not any issue. I just want my camels back. So Hanata, he says, this is not an issue. Let's have him speak to Abraha directly. He enters into Abraha's tent. When he enters into Abraha's tent, Abraha's on his throne. He sees the beauty and the honor and the way by which the demeanor that Abdul Muttalib was carrying himself. And he's so much in awe. He just gets off his throne, he sits on the ground, Abdul Muttalib. And he asks, do you have any need? Is there anything that you want me? And he said, yes, I want my 200 camels back. So Abraha says, I used to think you were an intelligent individual. I'm about to destroy the Kaaba of Allah, and you just are asking for your camels? And Abdul Muttalib, he turns to him and says, look, that I am the Lord I am the caretaker, the Lord, the Rabb. The term in Arabic is Rabb, the Rabb of these camels. And the Lord has the Kaaba, the house of Allah, has its own Rabb. I'm going to take care of my camels, and the Lord of the house will take care of the house. So Abraha just gets upset and says, just get out of here and take your camels. Now Abdul Muttalib, he goes to the Meccans and says, look, all of you, they promise not to harm you. They only want to destroy the Kaaba, but let's head for the mountains in case, because in states of war, sometimes people then become excessive. And so they head towards the mountains, and Abdul Muttalib, he and a few people go towards the Kaaba, and he holds the ring of the door of the Kaaba, and he begins to make dua, that, oh Allah, you are the Lord of this house, and you are the Lord of the Kaaba, so you protect this Kaaba. And then they leave. Now when they leave, Abraha, he's heading towards the Kaaba, and when he's heading towards the Kaaba, the next morning, Nufayl bin Habib, the one who I said they should have probably killed, he goes next to Mahmud, the elephant, and he whispers to him that, look, while you have the chance, go back safely to your home. Because verily you're in the sacred lands, the haram of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As soon as the elephant hears this, he sits down right away. The elephant sits down right away. They begin to stab the elephant. They begin to beat the elephant. They begin to pull the elephant. It's not moving. They turn it towards the direction of Yemen. It gets up, starts to walk. They turn it towards Syria. It walks even faster. They turn it towards the east. It walks even faster. They turn it back towards the Kaaba. It sits down again. And they're thinking, what is going on? This was our main tool of destroying the Kaaba. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is why they're Ashab al-Fil, they're the people who brought these elephants. And Allah ta'ala says, Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Didn't you see how we brought ruin to their plan? They had this kayd, they had this plan that they thought of. And we tadlil, we ruined it. We completely nullified their plan. Their force of the elephants, ruined. Now what are they going to do? They're going to try to use humans. But Allah will ruin that as well. Why? وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent these flocks of birds. Now ababil in the Arabic language, it's a plural, it has no singular, so it's a group of birds, but it doesn't refer to any particular types of birds. We know they were a bit smaller than pigeons, but they were a type of birds that were never seen before. In fact, in some narrations, we see that they came and they had these very red, what is the word I'm looking for? Claws. That their feet, their claws were very red. And Allah Ta'ala, He continues and He mentions, Tarmihim, that they threw, these ababil, Tarmihim, they came equipped, they fired down, they threw down bihijara, these stones, min sijil. These were baked stones, and these stones weren't large, they weren't like huge rocks. Rather, they were, because in Persian you have two words, you have sanj and you have jil. Sanj means stones, and jil means clay. And so these were small little balls, small little like lentil seeds, but they were very well baked. Some scholars, you say they were baked in the hellfire. Wallahu alam, I haven't seen the citation for that. And they were thrown with force from the skies. They came down like pellets, like bullets. And the narrations of the Tafseer, they mention that when it came unto the people, it would strike them, it would completely pierce through them. And so now the people who were there as soldiers were literally being torn apart. And when you look at this verse, as Aisha radiallahu anha mentions in the narration, that she and her sister, they both would say that we saw two riders or drivers of the camels of the Ashab al-Fil who came, and Allah Ta'ala caused them to be paralyzed and they were blind, and they would just be begging on the streets for help. Allah Ta'ala, He caused their ruin for having the intention of trying to destroy the Kaaba. The elephants began to run away. They all ran away except for one. One, unfortunately, was injured. Some of Abraha's men were destroyed just by these like divine bullets that came and just literally would pierce through them, and their skin would begin to sever, or their flesh would begin to sever from the limbs. Others, however, they were not as fortunate. They began to run away. They were struck down. They run away. They were struck down. Abraha himself, he was hit by these stones, but then a very deadly disease befell him. And they had to carry him back to Yemen, to Abyssinia. And when they began to carry him back, the disease began to spread. And as he was going towards Yemen, the disease spread so much that his fingers began to fall off. Then his limbs began to fall. And by the time they reached Yemen, he had already passed away from literally his limbs falling off. And I mentioned the two riders, the drivers of Mahmud, they had become blind and paralyzed. And Allah Ta'ala says, فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ. They became like straw. You know when you have straw that animals eat? They don't consume all of it. You see, if you ever see an animal consume straw or hay, they consume part of it, and whatever doesn't go in their mouth, its pieces broken up all over the ground. So it's not a clean consumption. Some of it goes into the animals, some of it just broken pieces, just littered all over the ground. This is how the men looked. فَجَعَلَهُمْ. They became كَعَصْفٍ like this like this straw, like this bran, ma'kul, that was eaten by animals, such that parts of them were just laying around everywhere. And this is Ashab al-Fil. And this is the story behind the people of the elephants. Practical and spiritual benefits and implications of Surah Fil. When I was making the slide, I decided now, unfortunately, it's not going to work the way I wanted because I don't have my laptop wasn't working with this interface, so I can't really do it on my wife's desktop. But I wanted to have your ideas now. And I was going to write down your ideas, what you thought the spiritual benefits were, and I was going to conclude with what I had to say. So I'm going to open the floor up. And what are your ideas of benefits? You can I don't know if I can on my laptop, but it's okay, no problem. What are some spiritual implications, practical benefits you can take from this? Like not all at once. Come on, I'm getting a little overwhelmed over here. Okay, how about we go to this slide instead? Our ideas. Let's look at our ideas together. One of the practical benefits from the story is we get the idea that so the other presenters, can you guys write on the screen for me while I'm just typing down? Because I don't have the touch screen, the laptop with me right now. So okay, so no, I'm on side, you can do it. Awesome. So the first practical benefit that we see over here is the idea of oppression. I never become the oppressor. So many times we have individuals who are in a situation of oppression, and the moment they become they become in charge, they become the oppressor. And this is something that's very frightening. And this is what happened with Abraha. They came in to stop Dhul Nuwas and the Himyar from the story of Buruj, and now all of a sudden they became the oppressors. So just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken some good from them doesn't mean they were guaranteed greatness in their lives. They had to continue being people of submission and continue being people of uprightness in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the first thing. You want to always recognize that you want to never be in a state of being the oppressor. And Rasulullah mentioned, Unsur al-akhak, help your brother, al-zalim aw al-mazlum, the oppressor or the oppressed. So the Sahaba said, O Messenger of Allah, we know how to help our brother if they're oppressed. But how do we help them if they're the oppressor? So what did he say? By stopping them in their oppression. By stopping them in their oppression. And if you ever have the opportunity where you become someone who has some opportunity to have leadership, do not become the oppressor. Because you will be that exact same person that you hated when they were in their position. So that's the first, that's a very key lesson. That's why the first lesson we take from Surah Fil, the idea of the oppressor and the oppressed. If we are oppressed, nonetheless, we never, ever become the oppressor. And sometimes I fear, and this we see Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah, they were oppressed, but he didn't become the oppressor. Rasulullah said when he came to Makkah al-Mukarramah, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم أنتم الطلقاء. There's no blemish on you today. And what was going through their minds? Because Sa'ad radiallahu anhu, what did he say? He said, اليوم يوم الملحمة. Today is going to be the day of what? Of what? اليوم يوم الملحمة, day of bloodshed. When they come to Mecca. And Abu Sufyan told the Prophet about this. And the Prophet said, لا بل, no, today al-yawmu yawm al-marhama. Today is the day of what? Mercy. So that's the first lesson that we take. The second lesson that we take is we take the idea that we have to learn from our history in order to save ourselves. We should never assume that we've become so progressed and we've moved forward so much that we do not need the benefit of history. If we do not need history, then Allah Ta'ala would not have made parts of the Quran all about history. He would not have had history be such a significant part of the Quran. The verse begins, Alam tara kayfa? Allah making history so clear, it's as if the Prophet is going to see in front of his eyes. These things are preserved so we take lessons from it. And the issue is that we've forgotten our history So we've forgotten ourselves. And so we have to look into our history, our Quranic history, our prophetic history, our human history, and see where the mistakes were made. And this is a practical benefit that we can take from having such type of verses where we see the Quran, because the Quran is not a history book, but it has historical narration. The third thing that we see is that all greatness eventually comes to an end. All greatness comes to an end. We see with Yusuf the Nawas, such an oppressor. 20,000 Christians he threw into the ditch. And he was one of the 3 kings in our history who had sovereignty basically over the entire world. And what happens with him? He is overthrown by Abraha and Arbab. Because all greatness comes to an end. كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ. Everything will come to an end. Except what? وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Except for Allah. So we have to know that all greatness will come to an end. And why am I saying this? Because there was a time, there was Islamic greatness in the world, and now we've come to a downside. And eventually will rise again. Thus, we do not assume that we're successful or failures based upon greatness. We do it based upon our submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in the end, Allah will make great and elevated whom He wills, and Allah will lower whom He wills, and sometimes it's a punishment, sometimes it's what? It's a test. The next thing that we see is the honoring of the signs of Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala mentions what? Allah Ta'ala mentions وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Whoever honors the signs of Allah, this is from the taqwa of the heart. This is from the taqwa of the heart. And so, sometimes we hear people say, oh, brother, it's not that important. No, these things are very, very important. For example, I was giving khutbah. I work currently as an imam. I was giving khutbah on Friday. The person who's sitting beneath the pulpit had his feet facing the qibla. And it was just so problematic. It was so problematic because this is the direction where our hearts face, our faces bow down towards. We would never sit with our feet facing our parents. Imam Shafi rahimahullah, he never faced his feet towards, forget the qibla, that's assumed. Even the home of his teacher, and his teacher lived a few blocks away. So we honor the signs of Allah. The Kaaba, Allah doesn't live in the Kaaba. It's not the house of Allah. Nothing can hold Allah Ta'ala in this world. However, we honor the signs of Allah. So people sometimes, they read a sajda verse. They put the Quran on the ground and they do sajda. Astaghfirullah. Our feet are touching that ground and we're putting Quran on that place? No. We honor the signs of Allah. مَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. To honor the signs of Allah is from the taqwa of the heart, from the piety of the heart. And this is what they were doing. This is what they were doing. The Arabs from Dhun Nafar and Nufail bin Habib, they knew they couldn't overtake Abraha, but they were trying to honor Allah and honor His home. The next thing that we see is that the recognition of being sorry, I just lost where I was. The recognition of the junud of Allah Ta'ala. So meaning, and I'm going to put this in quotes because I don't want people to misquote it. Soldiers of Allah. Everything in this world. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودَ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. That no one knows the soldiers of your Lord except for Him. Ibrahim alayhi salam, a soldier of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, was for Rasulullah was the spider web, the spider or the pigeon that laid eggs in front of the ghar of Thawr, in front of the cave. We see, so many things can be soldiers of Allah. So we have to try to be quote unquote soldiers of Allah, and we have to respect and honor everything that will be a soldier of Allah. And this is a very subtle point, but we have to understand that we are caretakers of Allah on this earth. Khalifa. If we see something on this earth, we don't know the role that Allah Ta'ala plays for it. We should honor it. That includes disbelievers. Disbelievers are human beings in the end. We honor them. because they're creations of Allah. In the end, yes, they don't have deen. May Allah grant them deen. May Allah protect our deen. But we don't know whom Allah will use. We don't know whom Allah will use. Allah Ta'ala can use the same person, Abraha, who was destroyed by Allah, was the same one that he used to save believers. We don't know. And thus Rasulullah mentioned a very interesting hadith that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَيُؤَيِّدُ هَذَا الدِّينَ وَلَوْ بِرَجُلٍ فَاجِرٍ. Allah will aid this religion even with a sinful person. Now this hadith is very interesting because in the battle, the Sahaba were watching this one man fight with such fervor intensity that they said, this person is a person of Jannah. Rasulullah said, he's a person of hell. So followed this man, and he saw even more intensity in him. And there were some questions arising in the heart of this Sahabi, until that man was given a serious injury, a serious blow in battle. So at that night in his tent, in his resting area, the injury was hurting him so much that he put a sword into the ground. He leaned the hilt into the ground. He leaned over the sharp part, and he dove himself in, and he committed suicide. And that Sahabi went to the Prophet and said, "O Messenger of Allah, I have more belief in you than ever before." And then the Prophet asked why, and he told him this is why. And Rasulullah then said, "Verily, Allah will help this deen even with a person." Now, there's a deep meaning here. The soldiers of Allah doesn't have to mean that there's believers. That person was a soldier of Allah. Literally, in that case, is the battle. But we should never assume just because I'm doing minna work, I'm the presenter, I'm the one who's giving the halaqah, I'm the minna president, I'm the minna regional representative, I'm the minna organizer, etc. No, that makes no difference. وَلَوْ بِرَجُلٍ فَاجِرٍ. A person could be a sinful person, and yet Allah can use that person for benefit. This is why I was saying in the beginning, we have to focus on our spiritual growth. We have to focus on our spiritual growth. We cannot just assume because we're being utilized for good right now that all of a sudden we're going to pass away in a state of goodness. I don't know how much time we have left. There's a few more things to mention over here, but I can cut it off because I've gone a bit long, and I don't want to take people away from their homes and their families, and maybe some of you are married from your spouses and your children, and whatever the case may be. So you can tell me, and I'll happily stop. I have no problem with that. But you guys have to tell me. So you can type in the presentation box, or you can. So 5:20 is fine. It's only 4:10. Oh, you guys are Eastern time. Okay, it's like an hour 10 more minutes. Wife's gonna kill me. Okay. The next lesson that we take from this is the fact that Allah Ta'ala will take Yasmin Atta. Are you from the Milwaukee area? Your last name sounds like a family in the Milwaukee area. Yes, okay, mashallah. Milwaukee Munawwara, right? So, alhamdulillah. I don't think we've ever met, but alhamdulillah. Okay. So, well, the next lesson, yes, it's a beautiful city. I'm from Chicago, and I prefer Milwaukee. It's a wonderful city. I really hope I don't have to move. It's a wonderful city, alhamdulillah. Now, the next thing that we see, I said that my dad's calling me right now. This is a setup again, guys. And I don't know how many contacts you guys have. I'll call him back as soon as I finish. The next thing that we see is from when they went to Banu Thaqif. When Abraha went to Banu Thaqif, for their own personal interests, they said what? Oh, yeah, go ahead, destroy Makkah. We won't stand in front of you. And one man even said, in fact, I'll help guide you toward Makkah. And he became known as, his name was Abu Rigal. And so Abu Rigal, so let me put the point. So let me say the idea and then I'll give the points. Abu Rigal was willing to betray his own people, the Arabs, and his own heritage, i.e. the Kaaba and the worship of Allah, for the sake of personal gain. So because he sacrificed him, he tried to seek honor for personal gain, Allah just honored him. So I guess never exchange temporary honor for permanent dishonor. Now what happened here? The Arabs today, they still say he was coward, or she was a coward, or was a backstabber like Abu Rigal. They actually use the term Abu Rigal. That name is known within spiritual folklore, Arab folklore. That person was like Abu Rigal. They actually use his name. I mean, we're talking about 400 years later as an insult today. And now look at the opposite. There's a person named Hatim al-Ta'i who was a great, generous man before Islam. And the Arabs still use his name to honor generosity. So when you do something for the sake of goodness and for the sake of Allah, even though there might be a temporary type of delay or a temporary type of loss, quote unquote, it will give you permanent gain. Now, Nufail bin Habib, he tries to defend the Kaaba, and he is supposed to be killed, but he's not killed. And now look, his whispering, what does it do? It gives, you can go and type in the your idea section, that's fine, it's not a problem. It actually works out very nicely. What happens is that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Anyway, so the general idea was what? Temporary honor will never grant permanent, well, is not worth the permanent dishonor. It's not worth the permanent dishonor. So do not put yourselves in that type of category. The next lesson that we learn, there's actually a lot of lessons in here. So I'm trying to, is the way, the far reach of the Prophet ﷺ, his miracles, the far reach of the Prophet ﷺ. Look, his coming, in the Arabic language, they call it irhas. Irhas is like, the scholars of hadith, they say, irhas is like the introduction. So for example, when you get up for Fajr, when you pray Fajr, is there some light outside? Yes, there is. There's some light outside. Some. Has the sun risen yet? No, it hasn't. But the power of the sun is so strong that even though it's still beneath the horizon, its light is still seen above the horizon. The Prophet ﷺ, he was going to be such a force in this world for change and benefit and growth that even before he came, his miracles also already became prevalent. The ulama say that the scholars of hadith, they say that the ashabul, this story is a mu'jiza of the Prophet ﷺ. And he wasn't even alive yet. But still his mu'jiza was so far reaching. Now we have to look that this was the way of our beloved ﷺ, the far reach of our Prophet ﷺ. Should we be people who step away from that far reach and allow ourselves not to benefit when literally the world benefits from him? And so we have to be people who become people of the Messenger's lesson. Now, by this, I don't mean you have to have a long beard or tie a turban, etc., wear niqab. If you want to do that, go ahead, you can do that. Any way you can fulfill a sunnah. Go and give your neighbors food. Go smile at people. You find filth on the street, go pick it up. All of those things. This is the Prophet ﷺ, his reach was such that humanity till today still speaks about it. I was telling you yesterday that why do some people make fun of the Prophet ﷺ? So what was the example we're using? We're saying, man, I'm not really well versed in basketball. I mean, I'm awesome at basketball. I'll probably beat all of you, but I'm not really well versed in it. That was tongue in cheek over there. But okay, we're talking about who are these stars? Who's a greater clutch player? Now I don't know. I don't actually watch basketball, follow it. Stephen Curry or LeBron James, right? This is what we're talking about. And I spoke about this for a reason in the class I was teaching yesterday, day before yesterday, Friday. So I was saying, why do we even have this conversation? Let's say people love LeBron James, okay? Why do we even talk about Stephen Curry? We talk about him because he's a threat. When he's a threat, then we speak about him. Because he's the only person who might come close to the legacy of, forget LeBron James, Stephen Curry. Let's say like LeBron James, Michael Jordan. Why do people even talk about LeBron James? Because he's a threat. All of a sudden, he might overtake the legacy of Michael Jordan. So they speak about him. You don't speak about the non-threats. The world today, when they speak about the Prophet in an ill manner, we should actually be very happy because they recognize some greatness within him. You don't hate on a person except that you recognize some greatness in that person. And so even the world today, they have been affected by the far reach of the Prophet. Unfortunately, they're very ungrateful, but they have been affected by it. Okay. And there's actually a few more. I'm going to stop over here. I'll take questions. I'll stop over here. There's a few more things here about Abdul Muttalib and his recognition of Allah's greatness, how he went to the Kaaba and asked the Kaaba to look at the power of dua. He goes to the Kaaba and says, oh Allah, this is your house, you protect it. He doesn't try to he recognizes Allah in the end is in charge. He does what he can do. But then he leaves it for Allah. And that's something we have to learn that we can only go so far. But in the end, you have to leave things for Allah, to make dua to Allah, and turn to Him in trust and in submission. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. If not, it's a beautiful day outside. Go take advantage of it. Cool. Nothing else? Then inshallah we will meet. I don't know, whenever Na'man said we're supposed to meet, just let me know, and I'll try to have everything prepared for them, inshallah.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So if nobody has any questions, then inshallah we can go ahead and end there. First and foremost, Jazakallah to Brother Saad for the amazing information and knowledge that he's given us all today. And utmost respect to all of you guys who stayed on all the way from 4 o'clock, or Eastern time, I guess 4 o'clock. And again, I just want to apologize for the technical difficulties. That's on us. Sorry about that. But thank you guys for staying on. And Jazakallah to Brother Saad again for the amazing halaqah. Inshallah, in 2 weeks will be our next halaqah at the same time. Surah Quraysh, I think, is the next one. So, yeah, and as Brother Saad said here, you can private question him at his email. And with that, we can go ahead and end. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
I saw how this